So in this video, I'm going to be talking about how do you afford anything that you want in your life, and how to use the power of debt to really bring your dreams into reality. And I'm not talking about bad debt, I'm talking about good debt, because there is good debt and there is bad debt. And I'll explain the difference in a second, but I just want to go back to the incident when I was 14 years old. It was my first time I was traveling out of India, and I went to Dubai, very ironically, and now I do business in Dubai. But when I went there, there was a beautiful mall, one of the largest malls that I went to, Dubai Mall, and the Mall of Emirates, which is another one. And I saw everything in that mall, and I read the price tags on the things that were there. And the price tag were, a couple of $1,000s for glasses, few $1,000s worth of, clothes that you would wear in one day. And I mean, items that were so far beyond my reach at the time that I got extremely choked up and cramped, and I started to feel so small in my whole body, in my identity, because my mother at that time was making $2,000 a month, and she was giving her whole life to make that money. She was giving all of her time and more, even the weekends. She was giving her health away. I mean, so many sacrifices, wouldn't spend time with us, and still she was just able to get $2,000. And here there are people who are able to afford a $2,000 piece of cloth that goes on your body, and which is just really to show. And how are they able to do it? So it was very traumatic experience for me at that time, and neither my mother understood how they did it, neither I understood how they did it, and I had to rely on my mother for information. But if I had just studied finance and the subject of finance and how dreams are converted into reality, and the key component in that is finance. If you just understand a little bit of finance, just the basics, just the foundation, everything suddenly will become accessible, will seem accessible. All you gotta do is just put the parts together, and you will have basically anything you want in the world that's materialistic in nature, and even something that's spiritual, you will have the best access to that. But how do you afford things? Then I started to look at the buildings. I started with clothes, then I went to supercars, and I said, how does someone afford this? It's crazy. And then I looked at all these large buildings and these large malls and these giant houses and these big companies that were there. And I always wonder, how did this start? Who started this? And the only rational conclusion that I could come in my mind is that maybe their grandparents started something and then they built it. Or maybe they took some really big risks and put themselves at risk financially, even at the risk of completely destroying themselves. And they did it by taking extremely risks that were extremely severe, and that could have resulted in a total destruction. And still they did it. So these guys were maybe maniacs. And so those were the only two conclusions that I could arrive at, that it has to be inherited, or the guy has to be crazy, or doing something illegal. I could not believe in my mind that you could just go in and buy something that's $5 million, $10 million. So fast forward 10 years later, I walk into a clinic. It was a $5.5 million clinic. Even when I was entering the clinic, that little 14-year-old boy was still inside of me and was getting nervous. Like, how am I going to buy this thing? I mean, I don't have the money to buy this thing. How am I going to buy this? And I went and I negotiated the deal, and then another $10 million came in. I had the purchase price and everything. And then one day I sat down with my CFO, and I just felt this, like choked up feeling that this is too much money and how am I going to come up with it? And then I sat down with my CFO and he says, Prithvi, we're going to do an exercise today. This is a CFO of a $400 million company. He was a senior partner in PwC. He was a retired senior partner, and he was on my board. And he sat down next to me and he said, open Excel sheet, and we're going to do some numbers. I said, okay. And then he started to, I understood the principle of how to finance things, but I never did the numbers. I never actually did the numbers. So I sat down with him. It was a $10 million deal and a $3.5 million deal. So we started, okay, 10 million, we will divide it over 6 years. All right. So I wrote down, 10 divided by 6, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6. Okay, then we're going to add interest payment every year. So, okay, we added interest payment every year. Okay. And I was like, this is still a lot. How are we going to pay for this? And then he said, Prithvi, this deal that you have brought together, write down the cash flow that this business is going to generate every year. Now, if you look at just the debt payment every year, it suddenly seems out of reach. And it's really a very mental thing. It suddenly seems out of reach. But the moment I wrote down cash flow, I was like, this makes total sense. Because the cash flow was almost double than the debt payment. So I was like, wait a second. I am buying something for $10 million, but that thing that I am buying is producing cash flow that is way more than the debt payment that I would be making. And in fact, it's not just a little bit more, it's much more. And this business has been producing this last 10 years. So what special thing that's going to happen that's going to disrupt this? I mean, unless I have to be responsible and I have to put proper management in place. But assuming all of that, the patients are happy, they are being serviced, the doctors know how to do their job, and all I gotta do is just change the ownership. Get the debt, give it to the owner, change the ownership. Now I have access to cash flow, use the cash flow to pay off the debt, and I can do the numbers in advance to see how it's going to be paid. And I go to the bank and I show them these numbers based on audited financials, audited by an accounting firm validating that the numbers are correct. I show, this is the deal. This is your interest that you will make every year, and you can calculate your bonus that you will receive, Mr. Banker. The moment I did that exercise, all of a sudden I had a mental shift that changed my life forever. From that point on, I left my house. Anytime I would look at a building, a hotel, a house, whatever, a business, a large company in a news or wherever, I was like, no deal is big enough to finance. Nothing is too big enough to finance. If you bought it at the right price, and if you structure the debt over a long period of time so that the yearly payment is smaller than the yearly cash flow of the thing that you're buying. And it's better if it's double the cash flow than the debt service. So it's just like an expense. Debt is just an expense. And my relationship to debt completely changed. Because I had seen the negative side of debt. I had seen a side of debt that I got exposure from my mother, because she took a loan to send my brother to America to become a pilot. And airline industry is one of the worst industries you can get into. And he came back and there were no jobs, and she still had to make the payments. But the thing is that she was making the payments by giving her time up. She was generating that income by giving up her time. And hence she was, had to work, and she was in the rat race. But when you have a business that's well established, especially a $10 million business, $5 million, $3 million, and then you are not the one working all day to generate that income. You have employees who are giving up their time for you to generate that income. It's a sad thing, but they're working for a salary which is risk-free, and you are the one taking the risk. But you're leveraging the time of the people working in that business. You're paying them a salary, they're happy, and they are the ones driving this cash flow, and the customers are paying, they're happy, and the clients the employees are servicing them. And it's the whole machine is generating this cash. And to buy this machine, you took debt and you structured it over a long period of time. I remember my mentor once mentioned, I asked him, how much can you pay for these businesses? How much? What's the ratio? What's the price? And he gave some parameters, and then he said, you know what? I'll tell you something. No price is too big. You can pay any price. Listen to this carefully. You can pay any price for this business as long as you're paying it over a long period of time. As long as you stretch the loan out as far as you can, so that the debt payment is always half of the cash flow that the business is producing. If the cash flow covers the debt service, then you're good to go. It doesn't matter what the price is. The terms around that price, how that price is going to be paid, over how much time, that's more important than the price itself. And that's why you see, many celebrities sign $1 billion contracts or $700 million contracts. You need to assess and look deeper. Okay, great $700 million contract, but over how long is this going to be paid? Is it going to be paid over 20 years, 30 years? We need to know that details. Anyways, forget the celebrities. Let's come back to our asset. Let's say there is a business, and my mentor said, you can structure this. You can structure a deal. Okay, it's a business that was worth actually $1 or $2 million. He says, you could pay 10 million for this. And I was like, what? He says, yeah, pay over 20 years, 25 years. And I mean, he gave an obnoxious example, but he just was illustrating a point that, okay, the seller may ask you for a crazy number. Either you negotiate it down. If you cannot negotiate it down, say, okay, fine, you want this number? Fine. Instead of paying you in 5 years, I'm going to pay you in 15. Take a little bit from the bank and the rest structure it over time. And then the seller has to make sure the business runs, so he receives the payments. But on the sheet of paper, it's going to be a $10 million deal, $15 million deal, but paid over time. I'm mixing a little bit with seller's finance and debt. I understand that. Those of you who are technically savvy, financially savvy. But I'm just illustrating a point that if you just take into account the debt, you're going to get intimidated and scared, and you will think you have to work to generate to pay this. But if you take into account the asset that you're buying, is it healthy? The industry that you're getting into, is it stable? The profit margins, is it good? The business, has it had a track record of 10 plus years of producing that money? What are the services and products? Do they have any lawsuits? If you assess several factors in the business to come to a conclusion that this is a healthy business, and you use your dream team, the experienced board that you have to assess all of this, and you go deeper into documents and check all of that, verify all of that, and you make sure the cash flow is there and everything, then you have to take into the account not just the debt, but the cash flow that the business will be generating to pay off this. And once you put those parts together, especially in your mind at the beginning, the entire world starts to seem within reach, within your access. And all the smaller things in life, clothes, bags, cars, whatever, once you know how to finance big things, the smaller things will just come. And that's the game of finance. Finance makes it possible for us to afford anything that we want. Because when you are making a salary, you are connected to only one wallet, your company's wallet or your boss's wallet. But when you raise capital from a bank, you are raising from a pool of many wallets, wallets of tens of thousands of people, and you're just taking a little bit as a loan. So where is your money coming from? And what are you buying? Are you buying something that produces cash, or are you buying something that is going down in value and doesn't produce cash? If you take this debt from the bank, instead of using it wisely, you buy something that goes down in value and does not produce cash flow, and worst, you have to work to pay this off with your time. You have to give up your time. That's a bad debt. And most people, when they get scared of the debt, this is the type of debt that they are scared of. And you want to buy things, even information. I have paid over a couple of $100,000 to courses and seminars, business courses, etc. And I did it. I paid, for example, Dan Pena around $40,000. I didn't have that money, but I used debt to acquire that information. And I know I'm going to use this information, but I didn't have to pay that money for 5-7 years. I can pay it whenever I exit the company. So there was no pressure. So the terms around the debt are important. The source of cash flow, from where and how it's generated, is important. The condition around the cash flows, how healthy it is all important. The bottom line is, once you do the numbers and once the cash flow cover the debt service significantly more, you can finance just about anything. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and hit that subscribe button if you're new to this channel, and I'll talk to you soon.